Share with you here very briefly a little bit more about the idea of games in education. Today in the education culture, there are a lot of terms out there like game-based learning and gamification, and trying to sift out an understanding, I guess, of what people are talking about and the practices that go with these different types is worth a few moments. So we're going to talk about some of the basics for the differences in game types and just dive right into it. The two primary kind of buckets, I guess, that you can consider, or at least like approaches to incorporating games into education, break down into gamification versus game-based learning. And so these are different in their approach and what they're trying to accomplish. Gamification is turning the learning process as a whole into a game. And this is where essentially you're going to take your content and try to get it to fit some sort of game construct that already exists out there in the world. Game-based learning is using a game as part of the learning process, which means that the learning experience itself is what you're trying, which means that the game itself is the learning experience, is what you're trying to foster or develop. So looking at these, if you've ever done a Jeopardy board, or like I did at one point in time, Deal or No Deal, where you take your content, you feed it through some pre-existing structure or game, such as Jeopardy or Deal or No Deal, and you're gamifying that experience for your learners. We do this with things like Trashketball. I've also had an opportunity to do this. We did this during football season with kicking paper field goals in the same way that you play Trashketball. But essentially, students answer questions. They get opportunities to play the game as a result of the right or wrong answers that come with that. And then we keep points and keep score, and a team wins and everybody has fun, as you can see with this fun group here in that picture from the tweet. So this can look like board games too, and so Apples to Apples is something that I really appreciate playing just socially, and in English class there have been times where we have thrown a literary term on the board, and that's sort of our green card for those that have played Apples to Apples, and we ask students to write their own example of a literary term, the one that is on the board. And so let's say simile goes up on the board, students might have to write a simile and then pass those anonymously to another group to score, and we select winners from that. So the gameplay is very similar to Apples, but we're really just gamifying that process of writing similes and learning about them. If you're looking for more information, I could not promote more the Explore Like a Pirate book by Michael Matero. You can also follow him on Twitter. His Twitter handle is there. Tisha Richmond, who is the author of Making Learning Magical, actually has Skyped in and spoken with some of our educators here in Westside Community Schools. And she is also very steeped in the process of gamification. And so if you want to follow her, that'd be another great follow. You can check out the T-Lab Twitter chat on Mondays at 8 p.m. There's also an XP-Lab Twitter chat that takes place, I believe, Tuesday nights around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So look into those if you want more on gamification. That said, game-based learning is something entirely different, though it's also, just like Jeopardy, probably a pretty familiar experience. But it just comes at the game plus learning angle from some place that's just a little bit different. So if you've ever gone through something like a stock market game in a business course where they give you fake funds, you might have $1,000 to invest over a duration of time to see who can earn the most money. That is a scenario where the learning is the game itself. And so we're not feeding this through any sort of television show or board game. We're really actually doing sort of a real life role play of the learning experience that you're trying to capture and assess. Westside has a government class that does a phenomenal job of putting students in these game-based learning scenarios consistently over the course of the semester, where students divide into political parties, represent states, and then come from those different states and parties to run for government office, and they even arrive at a point where they nominate presidential candidates, select a candidate to be the president, and then and there's debates. There's a lot that goes into this class. Essentially, though, each and every one of those experiences is a game-based learning experience, and they pick up the function of government through those scenarios. There's some social experiment games I know that I've heard of in like sociology or psychology, where you're placed into, for example, maybe a space where there are no laws, rules, or constructs, and you have to build a society out of that. That type of experience is a game-based learning experience as well. And so these certainly are not new practices, but it's important for the design of your own game for you to consider which of these two am I trying to accomplish. Is it more gamification? Is it more game-based learning? There'll be times where you actually have some overlay or like overlap between the two. So if you're like, I don't know which one to call this, it might be a little bit of both at times, and that's completely okay. Something that I've dabbled with that I think is just sort of next level awesome and really engaging for students in class is an alternate reality game. I would say that the West Side Government game really falls in this category, where essentially you're playing where the game-based learning experience is so consistently present that you almost feel like you're not at school anymore, that you're part of an entirely different world and construct when you're there. So I first came across the idea of ARGs by checking out Paul Dervasi's Ludic Learning blog, and where Paul, in an effort to help his students better understand the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, created an alternate reality game unit where he portrayed himself as being the big nurse, and you can see his picture there, and he wore a nurse's outfit every day to class and gave out prescriptions, which were really just assignments that students could either reject or take. And the entire experience was designed to have the students get into the same types of scenarios that the patients in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest get into in the book. What he found was that he was able to construct a game that caused them to start to kind of backbite and betray one another to the detriment of the whole. And it wasn't until the group got invested collectively and unified underneath that like shared goal and vision that they were able to kind of win and succeed and overthrow the nurses. And that's exactly what they go through in the book. And so he got a chance to ask his students to replicate this during their class experience. I built one for my class that I called the East Side game, where students in this dystopian high school setting were being oppressed by under the dictatorship of the principal, and it really forced students to have to experience being in a dystopia as part of our sci-fi unit. They were asked, they were placed in ethical dilemmas where they had kind of like two decisions to make, and it's really difficult between that right versus right decision, what they were going to do. And it's just a lot of fun. So if you want any more on this, because it's a long conversation to really get into ARGs, feel free to reach out. I would be more than happy to talk to you about it because I'm really nerdy like that. So this concludes our brief overview of the differences between gamification, game-based learning, and alternate reality games. Hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks for your time.